Hello again. I'm just gonna go through a few guidelines for today's session. If you could rename yourself to include your first name, last name, and any affiliation that you have, that would be great. The settings for this meeting are a little different than a more formal transit working group meeting. You can feel free to mute and unmute yourself, and the chat will also be open, so you can participate in the discussion by the chat or by unmuting yourself or by raising your hand, whatever you're most comfortable with. The raise hand function is, depending on your version of Zoom, either in the participants menu or in the reactions button. If you're on the phone, which I don't think we have anyone on the phone, but if you are on the phone at any point, you can use *9 to raise your hand. And if you have any technical difficulties at any point, you can contact either myself or my colleague, Matt Archer, via the chat box, marcher@ctps.org or 857-702-3708. Great. So we're just going to do a round of intros. So I'm going to start with myself. I'll call on the various Mpos staff people, and then I'll just go down the participants lists. And you can just unmute yourself and go through your name, your pronouns, and your role at whatever municipality, agency, or org you represent. So starting with myself, I'm Roisin Foley, she, her, hers. I'm the communications associate at the staff to the Boston Region MPO. And I will go to Matt Archer.
Thank you, Roisin. I am Matt Archer, he, him, his. I'm a transportation planner at the Boston Region MPO, and I will pass it off to, wait, are we doing passing it off? Sandy, go ahead.
Thanks, Matt. Sandy Johnston, I'm a transportation planner with the Boston Region MPO, he, him, his, and among other things, I manage the MPO's Transit Working Group, which is sponsoring this coffee chat. Looks like we have a great crowd today. I'm super excited for this. So let's just throw it back to Roisin to go down the rest of the list.
Sure. Next for staff, I believe, Betsy, would you like to go?
Thanks, Roisin. Betsy Harvey, she, her, hers. I run the Transportation Equity Program for the Boston Region MPO, including the Coordinated Human Service Transportation Plan.
Awesome. Thanks, Betsy. And I believe, is Stella here?
Yes, I am. Sorry, I don't know if my video is working for some reason.
Doesn't look like it, but can you still see the slide?
Yeah, I can.
Okay.
Sorry about that. Try to figure it out. But hi, everyone. My name is Stella Jordan. She, her, hers. I am the public outreach coordinator at the Boston Region MPO. Great to meet you all.
Thanks, Stella. And then Sean.
Hi there, I'm Sean Rourke. I am the new manager of outreach and communications for the MPO. I just started last week, and I recognize a couple of names on this call, including Carmel Levy, who I was in a different transportation group with in my old job at the nonprofit, the Alliance for Business Leadership. So I'm excited to be at this first meeting and to hear the presentation.
Awesome. Thanks, Sean. So I think from there, I'm just going to go down the list. Jenna.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jenna Henning. I'm the manager of grant programs for the Massachusetts Department of Transportation Rail and Transit Division, and I will be talking today about the Community Transit Grant Program. Oh, and my pronouns are she, her, hers. Thanks. Looking forward to it.
Thanks, Jenna. Next is Angela.
Sorry, everybody. Angie Constantino, she, hers, hers. I'm mobility manager at GATRA.
Thanks, Angie. Next is Carmel.
Hi, sorry, I've got a rambunctious toddler next to me, so I'm going to be spending most of my time muted. Hi, Carmel, he, him, his. I'm at MBTA. I manage institutional affairs. Thanks.
Thanks a lot. Next, Jennifer Glass.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Glass. I'm on the Lincoln Select Board.
Thanks. Jess Rice.
Hi, she, her, hers. I am with the Needham Council on Aging. I'm here to hear about the grant programs. I'm a MSW candidate.
Thank you. Next is John Strauss.
Hi, thanks. I'm John Strauss from the Burlington Transportation Committee, he, his.
Thanks a lot. Next up, we have Judy.
Hi there, Judy Shanley with the National Office of Easter Seals, and I also oversee federal transit administration and federal highway programs, federal grants, she, her, hers, and I just moved to Boston in July, and I work as a regional liaison on those federal projects in the FTA Region 1 area. Happy to be here. Thank you.
Awesome, thanks a lot. Next up, Christine.
Hi, I'm Christine Gorman, she, her, hers. I'm a vice president with Jacobs and interested in all things transportation.
Thank you. Next up, Lisa.
Hi, I'm Lisa Weber. Pronouns are she, her, and I am the Transportation Compliance and Quality Assurance Coordinator at the Human Service Transportation Office of EOHHS.
Thanks, Lisa. Next up is Perry.
Yep. Hi, Perry Grossman. Just interested in following along. I'm on the Brookline Bicycle Advisory Committee. Yep, thanks.
Awesome. Thank you. Rachel.
Hi, everyone. Rachel Fichtenbaum with Mass Mobility, a transportation initiative out of Health and Human Services.
Thanks, Rachel.
Oh, sorry. And she and hers is fine.
Thanks a lot. Shona.
Hi, Shona Norman, she, her, hers. I am the Transit Program and Compliance Manager at the Cape Ann Transportation Authority.
Thanks, Shona. Next is Steve Olenoff. Oh, Steve doesn't have his microphone. Westwood Planning Board and the MPO member alternate for the Trick subregion. I can do that for you. Susan.
Hi, Susan Barrett, she, her, hers, Transportation Manager, Town of Lexington. Thank you.
Thanks, Susan. And Thomas.
Hi, I'm Tom Roselle, co-op for Massdot and he, him.
And then I think I just missed Andrea.
Hi, everyone. My name is Andrea. I'm the Sustainability Director for the Town of Acton. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And I'm just here to tune in to some of the ideas. Transportation is, of course, a really important piece of lowering our greenhouse gas emissions. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks a lot. All right. With that, I will send it over to Sandy to introduce Jenna, I believe. Or we can go straight to Jenna.
No, I'll just give a brief introduction. Thank you, Roisin. I believe we've also been joined by Hain Kim from our staff. So it just says Sandy Johnston entered the waiting room, but that I'm here, so I don't know. Well, somebody else is about to join us. Anyhow, so it's my pleasure to introduce today's brief guest speaker, which is Jenna Henning from Massdot Rail and Transit. She's going to talk about the Community Transit Grant Program, and I will let her explain that in a moment. But we had a human services transportation focused coffee chat back in October, at which my colleague Betsy Harvey, who is here, taught us all about the coordinated public, see if I can get this right, public transit human services transportation plan that the MPO prepares every 3 to 4 years to help fund human services transportation projects. And Jenna is going to talk to us a little bit about the funding side of that thing. So hopefully people are getting a kind of full perspective look at the planning apparatus, as complex as it may be, from this. And we'll let Jenna go through her presentation, and then we will have an opportunity for discussion. You can ask questions for Jenna. We have a few other discussion questions that we can talk about more generally if that discussion does not take up the whole time. But for now, with no further ado, let's just go right to Jenna.
Great. Thanks so much, Sandy. And thank you for having me today. As Sandy said, and I said previously, Jenna Henning, the manager of grant programs for MassDOT Rail and Transit. And can I click? Sorry, I'm going to try to click forward on the slides, but I fear as though I did it. Okay, wonderful. Here it is. I'm going to share with you a little bit of information today about CTGP, which is just the cute acronym that we use for the Community Transit Grant Program. I'll also start by disclaiming I have a puppy who is chewing on something, and I hope she remains occupied by that. So I do apologize if that becomes a distraction. I'll run away with my computer. But basically today, I'm just going to sort of cover CTGP, the types of project funds, eligible entities, the timeline for the upcoming grant cycle this spring, and a few more things before we open it up to that broader discussion and, a casual question and answer session. So just a quick overview of what the MassDOT Transit Division is. We increase transportation options and improve mobility across the Commonwealth and New England more broadly by assisting, funding, and overseeing service provided by RTAs, regional transit authorities, municipalities, nonprofits, private carriers, and others. We work alongside the Rail Division, so you'll officially see us lumped in as MassDOT Rail and Transit. There's some hyperlinks at the bottom of the page, so if you're interested in learning more, you can visit those at your leisure. So, Community Transit Grant Program, what is it? Well, CTGP is how the Commonwealth of Massachusetts disperses Federal Transit Administration, FTA, Section 5310, and State Mobility Assistance Program funds. I know many of you on the call today are previous or current recipients of the funding, so a lot of this will just be an overview for you and information you already know. And for those of you who are new, it's a lot to take in at one time. So if any of this is confusing or you get through the presentation and you're like, what in the world? My contact information is available at the very end of this presentation, as well as at the beginning it was. And I'm here to answer any questions for you. So that FTA Section 5310 and state MAP funding provides and strengthens the transportation services available to meet the mobility needs of older adults and people with disabilities. We allocate these funds through an annual competitive grant process, CTGP, and I'll provide more information about like the time frame, eligible entities on the coming slides. So who's eligible for this funding? Nonprofit organizations, municipalities, councils on aging, and regional transit authorities. If you have questions about your eligibility, again, reach out to me. I'll be able to let you know whether your entity is eligible to apply for this funding or if you should look somewhere else for ways to provide transportation. Eligible projects. We provide funding for vehicles, replacement or new vehicles, all wheelchair accessible vehicles, operating expenses, which are basically just the expenses you need to run or support a transportation option that fills an unmet need as specified in your coordinated human service transportation plan that Sandy talked about and Betsy had discussed previously, and mobility management. We use mobility management as sort of a catch-all phrase to cover anything that's not a vehicle or operating expense. So I'll go into greater detail, but those are basically activities that help you coordinate transportation services, activities that help riders navigate mobility options like travel training or planning grants. And again, they must be covered in that coordinated public transit human services transportation plan. These coordinated plans identify the transportation needs of older adults and individuals with disabilities and provide strategies for meeting these needs. So if you don't have your Boston Region MPO plan bookmarked at the top of your web page, you can access it here at the bottom of the screen. And I know Betsy or anyone at the MPO would be more than happy to discuss it with you as well. Okay, now for the fun stuff. Local match requirements. It's important to note that this funding stream is not provided at 100% with federal or state dollars, and you'll be required to pay local funds. If you're applying for a vehicle, which is a capital project, or mobility management, which is also a capital project, you have to pay 20% of that total cost with local funding. And then operating expenses are split 50-50. So you'd be responsible for 50% of the cost of the project when you apply. There are lots of different funding sources that are available as your local match requirement. I listed a couple at the bottom of the page, but again, this is true of this and probably anything else I'll say throughout. If you have questions, reach out to me. It's a lot of information. And I'm always happy to let you know whether or not an idea you have in mind could be considered an appropriate local match. Some sources are local government appropriations, private or foundation donations, agency contracts, non-DOT federal funds are an eligible source, and we also allow in-kind donations. So if you don't necessarily have that cash match available, donated goods or volunteer services are also an eligible local match expense. They just wouldn't be eligible for the full 20% or 50% depending. All right, and the timeline. So we like to confuse you guys as much as possible. And even though we are in year 22, calendar year 22, we are working on the fiscal year 23 grant program. So here's an approximate timeline of what you guys can expect for this fiscal year 23 CTGP. And it's all subject to change. Lots of moving pieces, and things are hectic. So this isn't, written in stone. But the program will be oops, I got ahead of myself. The program will be announced in February 2022. That's when the dates for the application trainings, which are mandatory for new applicants, will be held. Those will be held late April, beginning of May. The application itself is open for roughly 2 months, so May through June 2022. There's a lengthy scoring and review process that'll take place from about July to September. We have to go through then another lengthy approval process, which should be done by about November 2022. And so if you apply in the spring, you'll know by the end of 2022 in either November or December whether you received funding. If you receive funding for a mobility management or operating award, those funds can be available to you starting January 1st, 2023. So about a year from now. And then if you receive a vehicle, that vehicle isn't available for about a whole year after. So your application will be due in June 2022, and you wouldn't get the vehicle until June of 2023. Another disclaimer, as everyone is well aware, there are some supply chain and manufacturing issues across the board. So that will likely impact vehicles moving forward. All right, and vehicles. So Massdot is responsible for procuring the fully accessible vehicles. So you don't apply for the funds and say, I want to purchase this vehicle, and then we give you the money and you go out and get it. There's a select list of vehicles from which you can choose, and that document is available online. And it sort of details all of the various vehicles that are available to you, their pricing, and other things that you might be interested in knowing, like who's manufacturing them. We have everything available from a type A, like minivan, to wheelchair accessible vehicles to a larger 16-passenger vehicle that can hold up to, I believe, 4 wheelchairs inside of it. So those are the vehicles. Operating projects are basically the expenses necessary to maintain and operate transit. So like driver's dispatch and salary, fringe benefits, fuel and maintenance costs, direct administrative costs like telephone service or office rental space can also be available. And to be an eligible operating project, it has to exceed the minimum requirements of the Americans with Disabilities Act. So, it goes above and beyond that 3/4 of a mile ADA requirement to parallel fixed route transit. It improves access to fixed route transit, so a feeder service that gets people from point A to point B, maybe from a council on aging to a bus stop. It provides alternatives to public transportation. So if there isn't public transit available in your area, or it doesn't serve older adults or people with disabilities as well as it should, that's another available option. Mobility management projects, again, sort of that catch-all for anything that isn't a vehicle or operating expense. Travel training is a great example. So you can pay the salaries for people to help folks. figure out how to use fixed route transit, managing mobility options or resources. Previously, we funded Ride Match, which I will plug here. It is an online searchable database of all of the public and private transportation options available in the region. Angie Constantino, who is on this call now, who works for GATRA, sort of oversees that. So that's an example of something previously funded through CDGP that is still very beneficial to folks today. And I encourage you to take a look at it and see if your transportation resources included, or even help folks learn how to get around. And short range planning and technology. Maybe you're interested in starting a volunteer driver program, but you don't know if that's an actual need in your area or how it would even work. We can provide funding to sort of see if that's a great fit for your region. And Rachel Fichtenbaum, a link to Ride Match at the chat. So I encourage you to take a gander there. Thanks, Rachel. Best practices. So we have many applicants across the Commonwealth who come to us for funds, and unfortunately, there is not endless amounts of money. So to increase the likelihood of receiving funding, if you're applying for an operating mobility management project, especially, but even if you're just looking for a vehicle, there are some best practices that are worth incorporating to ensure to increase the likelihood that you'll be funding. And they're highlighted here, responding to an unmet local or regional transportation need, as outlined in your CHST plan, to coordinate with partners across sectors to build on and not duplicate existing transportation options. It's important to include riders in project planning, design, implementation, evaluation. And while this funding is you should prioritize transportation for older adults and people with disabilities, opening up the service and providing that unused capacity to the general public is another great way to increase mobility for all community members. And last February or January, the Rachel Fichtenbaum from Mass Mobility and I co-hosted a webinar, Expanding Mobility Through Mass DOT's Community Transit Grant Program. I did steal the title for this webinar today. And there's a report that sort of details these best practices and highlights some examples linked to at the bottom of the page. So I encourage you to take a look at that because I know this is a lot of information and it gives you some better examples of projects that we've previously funded that we consider to be best practices. And there's a few of those examples now. I'm trying to be cognizant of my time, so I don't want to go into too much detail. I will say that that report on the previous page specifically calls out the Quabo Connector, which is a transportation service that serves 9 rural towns in the Quabo region. It also talks about MVRTA's travel training program, which MVRTA is the Merrimack Valley Regional Transit Authority, and they applied for a grant to develop videos to show people how to ride the system's fixed route buses. And then the Blue Hills RCC, which is a regional coordinating council based out of like the Quincy and greater Quincy area. They had received funds for multiple years for a multiple-year planning study that turned into implementing a pilot service. Those 3, as well as 1 more, are highlighted. So I won't go into too much detail, but I encourage you to take a look at them just to sort of see the types of projects that we fund. I won't talk too much about the other examples, but another great one is the Hilltown Driver Pool, which is out in Western Mass, and it supplements the use of the Franklin Regional Transit Authority's demand response van. It combines several COA volunteer driver programs, and it has a centralized dispatch with driver vetting and training and administrative support. And drivers use their personal vehicles and are reimbursed for expenses to get older adults to medical rides. So that's another great example. And then the other one I included is a mobility management, which was funded in last year, fiscal year 21, the Brookline Trips program. And so it's funding to develop train the trainer curriculum and support materials for transportation topics, like how to teach older adults to ride Uber and Lyft. And it includes an online peer-to-peer learning module. So those are just some great examples of projects that we've funded in recent years. I unfortunately did not include a link on this page, but there are many links to the Community Transit Grant Program website included throughout this presentation. So you can see a list, I think it goes back to 2013, of all of the projects that we've funded. And I do just want to say, as you're taking a look on that list, if you are curious about any of these programs or you think these projects might be well duplicated in your area, please feel free to reach out and I can connect you with the individual or individuals who had those programs, so you can learn more about what they did to get it off the ground and see what might work well and even what won't work in your area. I also wanted to share some other funding sources with you because I know, the way this grant cycle is set up, you might need money sooner, you might need money later, you might need money that we are not able to offer you. So one more funding stream coming out of the Department of Transportation is the Shared Streets and Spaces program. It provides cities and towns with grants between like $5,000 and $500,000 to improve like plazas, sidewalks, curbs, streets, public spaces in support of public health, safe mobility, and renewed commerce. So you can find information about that at this link. And those applications, I believe, actually are open now, or they open soon, and they're due on March 1st, 2022. And then I also linked to the Mass Mobility. So Mass Mobility is a transportation initiative out of the Executive Office of Health and Human Services that Rachel Fichtenbaum, who shared some links on the bottom of the screen today, oversees. And so she has a great webpage that lays out all of the various transportation funding resources that are available. And I would have been remiss not to plug that while we're here today on this call as well.
If I can jump in for a second there, Jenna. Judy Shanley put in the chat that a potential funding source for matches. FTA has compiled a list of non-DOT federal agencies and programs that might be a source of match for this program. And there's a link in the chat. So I just wanted to draw people's attention to that.
Great. Oh, thanks so much, Sandy. And thanks so much, Judy. And speaking of Judy, she will be speaking on this webinar that I am now highlighting for you all. An upcoming event related to the Community Transit Grant Program, but also just mobility management more generally. Rachel Fichtenbaum from Mass Mobility, the Mass Healthy Aging Collaborative, and I are co-hosting a webinar on February 3rd from 10 a.m. to 12 o'clock noon. And you can hear how local agencies are incorporating mobility management in their work. It's featuring a few of the people that are on this call today, actually. So Angie Constantino from GATRA, Judy Shanley from the National Center for Mobility Management, Rachel Fichtenbaum from Mass Mobility, and myself, as well as the TRIPS program, which was mentioned. And they're just going to talk about the various ways that their organizations help to improve mobility for older adults and people with disabilities, utilizing what we call mobility management techniques. You can register at the link below. And I just yelled all that information at you, but that was everything from me today before we get into the question and answer section. Here's my contact information. I have a phone number, I didn't include it. Email is fine. And then another link to the Community Transit Grant Program. And then I also linked to Mass Mobility because I referenced it a lot today. And so if you're curious and wanted to learn more, that is available to you as well. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Jenna. All right, so if anybody has questions for Jenna, we can have a little Q&A session right now. Please feel free to raise your hand or just unmute yourself and start talking, or you can say something in the chat. I see Judy, is that a hand? Or is that a congratulatory clap?
It was a clap, sorry.
No, it's good. You're learning to use the whole feature set of Zoom.
Thanks, Judy.
Jess appreciates it. All right. No questions? Must have been a very informative presentation.
I covered everything possible. Who you know.
All right. Well, if you want to follow up with Jenna later, Jennifer, go ahead.
Hi. Are there any examples out there of projects where towns that are in different RTAs have come together to sort of provide, shared transportation across towns that may not be in the same planning region?
Yeah, well, the Quabo connector is the first one that comes to mind, though there are definitely others. Those 9 towns sit in between the boundaries of a few different RTAs, and they were able to sort of build on existing partnerships and create new ones to create a transportation service that operates across municipal boundaries and then RTA boundaries. But if you're interested in learning more, I'll make a note of that and we can touch base about it, and I'd be more than happy to talk with you about others that are applicable.
So I see 2 other hands, but I actually had a follow-up to that myself, Jenna, which is in terms of if you have towns that are collaborating on an application that are in multiple MPO regions, does the project need to be in the coordinated plan for both MPOs?
I would say yes, although if it's included in, I would say yes. And I imagine if the project is included in the MPO for one, it would be included in the MPO for other. The important thing to note is that like your inclusion in a CHST plan, it doesn't have to be explicitly mentioned. So like your organization doesn't have to be mentioned by name, or as long as the unmet need is just generally there, as like the plans are pretty broad. So it would include most of the things we've talked about. You would just need to point to the page there. And if you're interested in applying and you're like, oh my gosh, this actually doesn't seem to be covered in the MPO, again, reach out to me or to your local planning organization, and they'll be able to assist you, probably best.
Awesome. All right, I see Judy, you have your hand up.
I did. Now I did. I was curious, Jenna, what kind of reporting or data collection requirements do these grants have? Is it tough? Is it a heavy lift for them?
That's a great question. It definitely varies between the vehicles and then operating and mobility management. For vehicles, the reporting requirements are a little bit more in depth. You have to report monthly mileage. I don't oversee that as much, so I don't know the ins and outs of what the transit databases require. But in our training webinars that take place in April, they go into the specifics a little bit more. And if anyone has questions, I could probably share like what that reporting would look like more generally. For operating and mobility management, it's really just quarterly reports. So you would have to come up with some data that you think would be how you should measure the success of your operating project, like your volunteer driver program. How many people were you able to drive that month? How many rides did you were you not able to cover is another metric. If you're a mobility management project for travel training, like how many people did you travel train? But we really just ask for that data quarterly, and then we're able to report it to the Federal Transit Administration. So it's not a heavy lift. It shouldn't be too burdensome. And if people find it, I would hate for reporting to scare folks away from applying. So if you're a smaller organization and you're scared about what that would look like, I know I've said this already, I'm so sorry to say it again, but reach out to me and I would do my best to work with you to make sure it's something your organization is able to handle.
Any other questions, points, comments? All right, well, thank you, Jenna, for an incredibly informative presentation and conversation. And we'll move on to the next slide at this point, but if folks still want to ask Jenna questions, please feel free if something comes to your mind in a moment or so. So, at this point in the conversation, the coffee chats, we usually throw out a few discussion questions for the remainder of the time that we have. And I thought we would customize the first one to kind of follow up on Jenna's presentation. And that is, how can we at the MPO support our stakeholders, that is all of you, in applying for funding sources and grants such as the Community Transit Grant Program? Is there anything we can do on the planning side, technical assistance, et cetera, that could be helpful to you in applying for these grants, aside from, of course, including the projects in the coordinated plan, which we've already talked about? Now you're all set? All right, well, if you have anything, let us know. So then we just have a couple more general discussion questions. What are the current gaps or challenges in medical and human services transportation in the Boston region today? And what resources, funding, technology are needed to launch or support medical or human services transportation? This is really your opportunity to discuss whatever's on your mind, whatever needs, wants you have right now that you'd like to bring up with the group, hear from people, get their input, etc. Susan?
Hi there. Yeah. So one of the things that I've noticed is that it seems like, when I get together with people that are in positions similar to mine, a lot of the rides being taken are actually for medical transportation. And I've wondered a few things. One, why, it just seems like there should be, I don't know, somehow a different funding source, or somehow this should somehow be part of like insurance or something like that. I don't really understand. And then it seems like we have so many different sources of transportation, but they're all separate. Like we're in the area of Minuteman Senior Services, for example, and if you become one of their clients, then you might get transportation through them. You have the human services transportation, right? And that's one thing, like that official human services transportation. It just all seems so choppy. Particularly when it comes to medical transportation. The other thing I'll say is I love the volunteer driving programs, because with medical transportation, the challenge is people are going everywhere. I mean, it's unbelievable how far and how often people have to go to places, and they're going to all different towns. I wish we need to change our medical system, which we can't do on this call here. But that's one of the challenges I see, to do the demand response transportation to medical appointments is just challenging, because you're taking people in all different directions. They're going far many times. And then to try and get back to them in a timely manner, it is just really challenging. I feel like there needs to be some sort of larger pool. Like I know the ride isn't perfect, but I use that as a model. Like it's a large service area. I don't know. I just feel like there needs to be something different when it comes to medical transportation.
Yeah, thank you, Susan. All right, John Strauss.
Hi, thank you very much, Sean. The question I had was regarding the microtransit or some of the ride services. Here in Burlington, we use Lyft for our Burlington transportation program. And what we found is that when you use Lyft, you're subject to surge pricing. And this has a very poor effect for somebody that's on a fixed income. So you're expecting to pay the Burlington Transportation pays some, and then you pay the little bit extra, over $10. But some surge pricing will double or triple that particular fare, which puts people on fixed income at a disadvantage. So are the contracts for these type of programs, are they run through Massdot, or does Massdot have any influence over this, so we can maintain the $1 per ride, which was the original intention of when we had the bus in Burlington, our little town bus?
Yeah, we would not be responsible for the contracting portion of that. It would be up to the entity who's, signed the agreement with either Uber or Lyft or whatever other TNC transportation network company that you were working with.
Okay.
And that's actually not something that had been brought to my attention before. So that's an interesting point. And I, as someone who's taken Uber and Lyft previously, I'm surprised it had not been thought of. I'm not sure. I'm going to make a note of that though, because that's interesting.
I know we have several programs in our area that do partner with Lyft. It's not just Burlington, Lyft or Uber for such transportation. Is there anybody else here who's been part of one of those who can talk maybe if you've negotiated a contract differently? Because I know we've talked about in various transit working group events, we've talked about such programs, and I had not heard the surge pricing concern come up. I assume that was covered by the contract.
Sandy, this is Angie Constantino. I can say that we've worked with Lyft and done programs with Lyft, but that it is not like we have to pay the surge pricing, and it has been an issue. Like it's hard to estimate how many rides you'll be able to get out of a pot of funding if it can change so wildly. We haven't had a situation where we've negotiated into a contract, but it is an issue. I guess I can just reiterate that it's an issue, but not really come up with a solution.
Yeah, thanks, Angie.
I would just like to say for the elderly and disabled, this is an equity issue. So we should be able to be addressed at some point from a governmental framework.
No, it absolutely is a huge issue. So I just want to point out, Judy put in the chat that the Shared Use Mobility Center has some examples of contracts, and she's going to take a look at that. Thank you, Judy. So let's go to Rachel and then Franny.
Hi, this is Rachel. I had a follow-up question for Angie. Angie, for the contracts with Lyft you were talking about, were you paying the surge pricing, or was it getting passed along to the consumer? Because I think part of what I'm hearing from John, if I understand correctly, is that surge pricing is getting passed along to the rider.
So we've done two separate programs, one of them with Uber, and the one we did with Uber, we gave the rider a redemption code for I think it was $20, kind of like that was our per trip. So I guess that would have been passed on to the rider in the sense that they wouldn't have gotten as much bang for their buck with that $20. And then with the Lyft program in Plymouth, we give the money to agencies, like the agencies have a pot of money and the agencies pay Lyft. So again, that would happen. So depending on which trips they're paying for, if they're farther or if they had a surge charge on them, they wouldn't have as much funding left over. They wouldn't be able to provide as many trips.
I'll just pipe in 1 second and just say that on the program that I use here in Burlington, the rider pays. So Burlington covers, so the extra charges are over and above what Burlington pays for the trip. And then the rider pays the difference, which in some cases up to $20, which would sort of put a person on fixed income at a disadvantage.
Yeah, thank you, John. Definitely hear that. So Lisa says in the chat that she'll hopefully have information regarding partnerships with TNCs in the next couple of months. Great, thank you, Lisa. When you hear that, please let me know, and maybe we'll have you come in to talk about that. Sounds like there's a lot of interest. All right, and let's go to Franny.
Yeah, hi. I was going to acknowledge what Jenna said at the end of her talk about if you see something that looks like it works in another area and you want to do it, we can put you in touch with them. And sort of top down. I think or if there's something that's working in Plymouth area, that Massdot or the funder would turn to all the others and say, this is working really well. It's working in this kind of situation. And all the communities that want to, and somehow choose to fund, rather than some of the funding not just be on demand, on request and application, but sort of be offered to do something that's proven to work in a certain type of environment. And thinking about that, I also feel so strongly about what Susan said about the choppiness. It's exactly analogous to vaccines and availability of testing and vaccines. It's all so choppy. And it's the same way with our transportation. That situation has been making me think about the transportation situation. The fact that we are constantly solving and resolving and in piecemeal our transportation issues. And sometimes we get closer to having a one call or a combined multiple town system. But in general, I feel like we haven't succeeded at tying it all together like that. And there's just so much inefficiency. So, I mean, this is nothing new to all of you. And it's nothing new to me, but I just sort of wanted to reiterate what Susan said. And maybe we could medical and really work on
I'm afraid you're breaking up a little bit there, Franny. And now you seem to be frozen.
Oh, sorry.
Can you just repeat the last couple things you said?
That I think that we, with the medical especially, maybe pick on one little piece, work on connecting up. And even though we, in some ways, combining the silos, one.
All right, so maybe, Franny, let's maybe come back to you in a minute. I see, Angie, you have your hand up?
I just wanted to say, and I know Jenna already talked about it and Rachel shared our link, but this sounds like a solution that maybe Ride Match could help with. One of the things that Ride Match does, it's not just a directory of transportation providers, but of services. So we can have grant-funded transportation in there, short-term transportation, long-term transportation. It can be taxi companies, but it can also be, you know, this medical service will take you from Lexington to these 4 towns, and with specific information about, you know, the length of the grant or whatever. So all of this information could be captured in Ride Match with specific choices. You can check different check marks. So if it's like a grant that's specific to seniors or a grant that's specific to persons with disability or to a specific group, you can denote that in Ride Match. So if anyone's interested, I would love to talk to you about it.
All right. John, did you have something else you wanted to say?
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I probably just left my hand up by accident. Thank you.
Okay. And Franny, can you, Jenna, do you have something?
Yeah, I guess I'll sort of, respond to Franny, and I do apologize, Franny, that you cut out a little bit. I know you always have beneficial things to add to the conversation. Coordination and collaboration between entities and across regional boundaries is really important and is really the only way to improve transportation as a whole in Massachusetts. And I appreciate what you said a little bit, because I do know, as I have heard before, that it's tough sometimes when this funding is reactive to applications that come in instead of being proactive. So that's definitely something that Mass.DOT is keeping in mind when it comes to these funds is, how can we really help to improve transportation as a cohesive whole instead of just like responding to various individual grant applications that come in. If anyone, has ideas or wants to talk about that more generally, I'm always here to listen and to learn more from all of you. But I do want you to know that that is something that is on our mind, and appreciate the feedback.
Well, at the MPO, we certainly love hearing these conversations starting and progressing about coordination and working across boundaries. That's what we're here to facilitate and help you all do. So that's great. Does anybody else have anything they'd like to bring up?
I just wanted to say hi, Franny. I don't know if you recognize me and my name, but Franny's from Acton, which is a town that my boss in the legislature for 5 years represented. So I used to meet with Franny all the time, and I'm glad that I'll be able to see her in some meetings going forward again. So Franny, it's good to see you.
Sean, hi. Yeah, I was in the car. Now I'm in my house and I'm about to get off onto my computer, so I'll be totally relevant. Or connected. It's nice to see you.
You too.
What position are you coming from today?
I'm coming. So I went over with Jen to the Alliance for Business Leadership, and then now I left Jen, first time in 7 years that I'm not working for her, to be the new manager of outreach and communications at the MPO. So this is my second week.
Excellent. Nice. Okay.
Thank you. It's good to see you.
Nice to see you.
All right, let's see. We have a comment in the chat. Judy says in Chicagoland, there's an applicant requirement in the 5310 program to describe how they're collaborating, and coordinating with other services and organizations. Can this be built into the application? I know this is something we do at the NPO for our Community Connections program, which is our first and last mile funding program, but it looks like Jenna has something to say about that.
Yeah, thanks so much, Judy. That is a piece of the application. So we weight applicants and more heavily if they do coordinate and collaborate, outside of their own organization, and definitely if it's, a wider geographic range than just one town. So yeah, that is a piece of it. That works well, but it could definitely work better. So.
All right, Susan.
No, I was just going to say, in terms of another gap, I find that a lot of the programs, they're for seniors and people with disabilities, and that's great, but it leaves out folks that are just low income and just don't have transportation. So I appreciate that, Jenna, said about this program, like if you can free up additional seats, see if you can do that. And I think that's great. And I think we need more of that, because those are the people that I often see falling through the gaps. And the challenge is, like, sometimes if they're people that are working, it's really hard to provide service for them, in a demand response fashion if they're going to work every day. Because usually when you have demand response, it just takes so much time, it just consumes so much resources, as opposed to someone, say, who's retired and just going. Sorry, I got a little bounce back on sound there. So that's more of a situation. I think we just need to do more of that proactive thinking about, okay, where do we want fixed route, and where do we want more of the, micro transit or demand response that is open to the public, for our seniors, people with disabilities, and just the general public. And that's certainly something the MPO can help us with.
Happy to continue that dialogue, Susan. Yeah, Franny, now that you're on your computer, is there something you want to follow up on from before?
No, I was just, my main two things I wanted to talk about was agreeing with Susan about the choppiness and wanting to take a piece of that and just make it happen. We did take a piece of that around here. We had several towns always showing up with the same vans, lining up behind each other at Emerson. And over the years, we put together Crosstown Connect and brought the towns so that they would be dispatched together. And it worked to some extent, but I'd say there's still so much siloing. And so I was agreeing with that, but also wanting that similarity and need to be turned into sort of top down. I think you probably heard this, but top down funding ideas. So, and I think Angie said something about this that sounded really like a good idea. I can't remember what it was. The idea of offering, I guess it was identifying, this works well for seniors in a rural area and a certain situation, and offering it so that people don't have to come up with the entire application, but that they can sort of be offered the funding and offered the type of program and the technical assistance in starting it by some agency or group of people, maybe from the MPO or maybe from Massdot, I don't know from what level, but who sort of oversees and comes in and helps replicate those successful programs from one area to all the other areas that could benefit. I just think it would save a lot of reinventing of the wheel that we're always doing.
Well, since you set me up for it, Franny, I just want to promote the MPO's Transit Service Planning Technical Support Program. Put a link in the chat there. The MPO does have a fairly limited but existent budget each year for providing technical assistance to transit authorities, municipalities, other transit operators. We have a lot more experience doing fixed route type stuff than we do with medical human services or demand response, but our planners, our transit planners are eager and willing to learn. So if you have any interest in a specific project, please do reach out. Paul Christner, the director, our director or manager of transit planning is the contact, but you can also work through me or Betsy or any of us. We can all find each other. So, all right, well, with 5 minutes to go until 5 o'clock, I think I would just like to start moving this toward closing out the conversation. So Matt, if you could advance us to the next slide, please. Just want to promote a couple of upcoming events. And we've heard a lot of discussion about demand response and microtransit, responsive transit today. And so that leads me right into our next thing. A week from today, 12:30 p.m., we're hosting, the Transit Working Group is hosting a forum on microtransit together with Mpos and the MBTA Advisory Board. We're going to kind of take a rigorous look at where microtransit works and where it might not, and how to make it work and how to evaluate it. Angie, who's here, will be one of the panelists. We're very excited about this. And you can sign up on Zoom at the link that Roisin just kindly put in the chat. It will also be recorded. And if you want to make sure you get the recording, you can register even if you can't make it. And we'll send out a post-event email with a link to the YouTube video of the recording. There will also be a meeting of the full transit working group on February 10th. That's a Thursday, I believe, at 4 p.m. And so that's a few weeks away. Registration information is available on the transit working group page through Zoom also. And we've got a pretty cool agenda coming together for that as well. And then you should also keep your eyes, ears, and email inboxes open for more information about more coffee chats like this one going on during the late winter and spring months. I think we'll keep coming back to this human services transportation topic. It's been a good one. We've had great conversations. It seems like we have a space here that's needed and that isn't necessarily existing anywhere else in the Eastern Massachusetts area. So I think you can anticipate that we'll come back to this every 2 to 3 months. And this has been a really great group. So are there any final questions or points that anybody would like to share? Jenna?
I just wanted to thank you all again for having me today and reiterate that if you have any questions about the Community Transit Grant Program, or if you have any sort of recommendations, whether at the MPO or any other organizations, for how this money can be best utilized to improve mobility and transportation in the Commonwealth more broadly, I'm here for that. So please don't hesitate to reach out to me. And thank you again, Sandy, and the rest of the MPO staff for having me here today. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and thank you, Jenna, for such a great presentation. Always a pleasure to have you. And, because Jenna's group plays such an important role in this space, we'll try and schedule future coffee chats on this topic so that she can make it. And yeah, also welcome to all of the new MPO staff, to Sean, to Stella. I think this might be Haynes for his coffee chat, although I'm not sure. And we'll be onboarding some other new people coming up soon, I think. So there will be more opportunities for introductions. Yes, Franny.
I said this in the questions that preceded this meeting. We're trying to work out emergency room trips home around here. And our problem is that we don't have a lot of taxi companies right here. So we're trying to sort of glom onto taxi companies from other areas. We have one that's part of our MAPC mass development taxi program, but we're looking for other ones. So I was just wondering if there's a central list of companies that some of your agencies and areas use or have relationships with, so that we can reach out to them. And what I found is they say, wow, it's gonna be really expensive. But I say, well, we just still need to know who could pick up patients at 2 a.m. on a Saturday night. So I just wanted to ask people if good for me to talk to. And I'm going to put my email in this chat. And if anybody has ideas of taxi companies that are flexible and willing to go out of their region, please talk to me. This is for the Concord area.
Yeah. And definitely Franny, I mean, I'm sure you know that Mara Holland and Travis Pollock at MAPC, who run that program, they surely have expertise in that. I imagine Rachel or Jenna might have some information on that as well. But yes, a tough problem to solve.
Yes. I spoke to the taxi company that Susan uses, in Susan Barrett in their area. But okay.
All right. Well, stay warm, everybody, and safe. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.